Hannah Williams never believed in ghosts. She thought they were silly stories, things for movies. Then things changed. Her world turned upside down. Hannah bought an old house. It was beautiful, but it had a sad feeling. Hannah felt it the moment she stepped inside. A chill ran down her spine. Something wasn't right. Hannah ignored the feeling. She was excited to move in. She was starting a new chapter, a chapter that would soon be filled with fear. One night, Hannah heard a noise. It was faint at first, almost like a distant murmur, but it was enough to wake her from a deep sleep. She sat up in bed, her heart already beginning to race. The room was cloaked in darkness, with only the faint glow of the moonlight seeping through the curtains. She strained her ears trying to catch the sound again. It was a soft whisper, the kind that sends chills down your spine. It was almost as if someone was standing right next to her, whispering secrets into her ear. She could barely make out the words, but the tone was unmistakable, haunting and eerie. She felt a shiver run down her spine, as she tried to convince herself it was just her imagination. It seemed to come from the shadows. Hannah was scared. She glanced around the room, her eyes darting from one shadowy corner to another. Every dark spot seemed to hold a hidden threat. She pulled the covers up to her chin, feeling a sense of dread wash over her. The whispering continued, growing slightly louder as if urging her to follow. She had never heard anything like it. The sound was otherworldly, unlike anything she had ever experienced. It was as if the very air around her was alive with whispers. She felt a mix of fear and curiosity. What could it be? She had to find out, even though every instinct told her to stay put. She got out of bed, her heart pounding in her chest. She followed the sound. Each step she took was hesitant, her feet barely making a sound on the wooden floor. The whispering seemed to guide her, pulling her towards the source. She felt a cold sweat on her forehead as she moved closer to the door. It led her to the attic door. It was slightly ajar. The door creaked softly as she approached, and a sliver of eerie light seeped through the gap. She hesitated for a moment, her hand hovering over the doorknob. The whispering was louder now, almost insistent. She took a deep breath and pushed the door open. A cold breeze seeped out. It was unnaturally cold, sending a chill through her entire body. The air felt heavy, almost oppressive, as if it carried the weight of countless secrets. She wrapped her arms around herself, trying to ward off the cold, but it seemed to penetrate right to her bones. Hannah slowly opened the door. The hinges groaned in protest, echoing through the silent house. She peered into the darkness beyond, her heart hammering in her chest. The attic was a place she rarely visited, filled with old memories and forgotten relics. She stepped inside, the floorboards creaking under her weight. The attic was dark and dusty. Cobwebs hung from the rafters, and the air was thick with dust. She could barely see a few feet in front of her, the only light coming from the small window at the far end. She took out her flashlight, the beam cutting through the darkness, revealing old furniture and boxes stacked haphazardly. She felt a presence there. It was an overwhelming sensation, as if she was not alone. She could feel eyes on her, watching her every move. Her breath came in short gasps as she scanned the room, the flashlight beam trembling in her hand. The whispering had stopped, replaced by an eerie silence that was even more unsettling. Someone or something was watching her. She could sense it, a dark presence lurking just out of sight. She turned around, her eyes wide with fear, but saw nothing. The feeling of being watched was so intense that she could almost feel the gaze burning into her back. She knew she had to leave, but her feet felt rooted to the spot. The attic seemed to close in around her, the shadows growing darker and more menacing. She took a step back, her heart pounding, and then another until she was at the door. She turned and fled, the whispering starting up again as she slammed the door shut behind her. She leaned against it, her breath coming in ragged gasps, knowing that whatever it was still up there waiting. The whisper became more frequent. Hannah would hear her name called out. Sometimes it was a soft murmur, other times it was a chilling scream. Objects started moving, doors slammed shut on their own, lights flickered and died. Hannah felt a constant sense of dread. She knew she wasn't alone. Something was in the house with her. It was angry and restless, and it wanted her gone. Hannah called in priests and paranormal investigators. They tried to cleanse the house. They performed rituals and blessings, but nothing worked. The haunting continued. The investigators were baffled. They had never encountered anything like it. They left Hannah with more questions than answers. She was truly on her own. The ghost remained. It grew stronger with each passing day. Hannah's hope began to dwindle. She was living a nightmare. Section 5. Living in fear. Sleep became impossible. Every night, Hannah found herself trapped in a cycle of fear and anxiety. The once comforting darkness of her bedroom had transformed into a realm of terror. She would lie awake, her heart pounding as she listened to the eerie sounds that filled the night. Every creak of the floorboard, every gust of wind, seemed to carry with it a sinister presence. The house, which had once been her sanctuary, now felt like a prison. The wind howled outside, rattling the windows as if trying to break in. The floorboards creaked under an invisible weight, making her feel as though she was never truly alone. Sent shivers down her spine. She would pull the covers up to her chin, her eyes darting around the room, searching for the source of the noises. Her imagination ran wild, conjuring up images of ghostly figures lurking in the shadows. The fear was palpable, a cold, clammy sensation that gripped her heart and refused to let go. Hannah was constantly on edge, her nerves frayed to the breaking point. During the day, she would jump at the slightest sound, her mind always on high alert. She couldn't shake the feeling that she was being watched, that something malevolent was always just out of sight. Her once peaceful home had become a place of dread, fearing the next ghostly encounter. She would tiptoe through the house, her heart racing, as she peered around corners and into darkened rooms. The fear was all-consuming, a constant presence that gnawed at her sanity. She knew that she couldn't go on like this, but she didn't know how to escape the terror that had taken over her life. The haunting seeped into her waking hours. It was no longer confined to the night. It followed her throughout the day. She would see fleeting shadows out of the corner of her eye, hear whispers that seemed to come from nowhere. The line between reality and nightmare had blurred, leaving her in a constant state of fear. She started seeing shadows lurking in the corners of her eyes. They would dart away when she tried to focus on them, leaving her questioning her own sanity. Were they real, or just figments of her imagination? The uncertainty was maddening, adding to her growing sense of helplessness. She felt a cold touch on her skin when no one was near. It was as if the spirits were reaching out to her, trying to make contact. The sensation was unnerving, sending chills down her spine and making her skin crawl. She would rub her arms, trying to dispel the feeling, but it would linger, a constant reminder of the unseen presence that haunted her. The haunting was consuming her. It had taken over her life, leaving her a shell of her former self. She was exhausted, both physically and mentally, from the constant fear and anxiety. Her friends and family noticed the change in her, but she couldn't bring herself to tell them the truth. How could she explain the terror that had become her reality? It was only a matter of time before it took over completely. She knew that she couldn't keep living like this, but she didn't know how to break free. The haunting had become a part of her, a dark shadow that followed her everywhere. She could only hope that one day, she would find a way to escape the fear that had taken over her life. The constant fear and stress took a toll on Hannah's health. Every day felt like a battle she was losing. The once vibrant and lively woman was now a shadow of her former self. The haunting presence in her home was relentless, never giving her a moment's peace. It was as if the very walls of her house were closing in on her, suffocating her spirit and draining her energy. The nights were the worst. The darkness seemed to amplify the ghost's presence, making every creak and whisper a source of terror. Hannah's mind was constantly on edge, anticipating the next scare, the next sleepless night. Her body began to show the signs of this relentless stress. She barely ate or slept. Meals became a distant memory as her appetite vanished. The food on her plate remained untouched, a stark reminder of her deteriorating condition. Nights were spent tossing and turning, her mind unable to find peace. The bed that once provided comfort now felt like a prison, trapping her in a cycle of fear and exhaustion. The lack of sleep began to take a toll on her physical health, making her feel weak and vulnerable. Her body ached, and her mind was in a constant fog. The simplest tasks became monumental challenges. She lost a significant amount of weight. Her clothes hung loosely on her frail frame, and her once healthy complexion turned pale and gaunt. The mirror reflected a stranger, someone she barely recognized. The weight loss was not just physical, it was as if the ghost was feeding on her very essence, leaving her hollow and empty. Her hands, once strong and capable, now trembled with weakness. The scale became a dreaded enemy, revealing the stark reality of her decline. Each pound lost was a victory for the ghost, a sign of its growing power over her. Her once bright eyes were now filled with terror. Her friends were worried. They could see the changes in her, the fear that had taken root in her soul. They tried to comfort her, to offer support and solace, but their efforts seemed futile. The ghost's grip on Hannah was too strong. Her friends' concern grew with each passing day as they watched her slip further into despair. They could see the haunted look in her eyes, the way she flinched at every unexpected sound. They knew she was in trouble, but they felt helpless to save her. They pleaded with her to leave the house. They begged her to find a new place to live, to escape the torment that was consuming her. They offered their homes, their support, anything to get her away from the source of her suffering. But Hannah couldn't bring herself to leave. The house was more than just a building, it was her home, filled with memories and moments that she cherished. Leaving felt like giving up, like admitting defeat. She clung to the hope that she could reclaim her life, that she could find a way to banish the ghost and restore peace to her home. But Hannah couldn't bring herself to abandon her home. She felt a deep connection to the place, a bond that was hard to break. The thought of leaving filled her with a sense of loss and sadness. She was torn between the desire to escape the torment and the need to hold on to the life she had built. The house was a part of her identity, and leaving it felt like losing a part of herself. She hoped that somehow she could find a way to coexist with the ghost, to reclaim her home and her life. She felt trapped, both physically and mentally. The walls of her home, once a source of comfort, now felt like a cage. The ghost's presence was a constant reminder of her helplessness. She felt isolated, cut off from the world outside. The windows that once offered a view of the world now seemed like barriers, keeping her confined in her own personal hell. Her mind was a battleground torn between the desire to flee and the need to stay. She felt like a prisoner, held captive by her own fears and the ghost that haunted her. She was a prisoner in her own home. The ghost had won. It had taken control of her life, her mind, and her spirit. The once strong and independent woman was now a shell of her former self, broken and defeated. The ghost's victory was complete, as it fed on her fear and despair. Hannah's home, once a place of joy and comfort, had become a place of torment and suffering. She felt like she had lost everything, her peace, her sanity, and her sense of self. The ghost's presence was a constant reminder of her defeat, a symbol of her lost battle. It had taken her sanity and her peace. The ghost's relentless torment had driven her to the brink of madness. She felt like she was losing her grip on reality, her mind unraveling under the constant strain. The once vibrant and lively Hannah was now a shadow of her former self, empty and detached. The ghost had taken everything from her, leaving her with nothing but fear and despair. Her home, once a sanctuary, was now a prison, and she was its captive. The haunting had exacted a heavy price, one that Hannah was paying with her very soul. Desperate for answers, Hannah delved into the history of the house. She uncovered a tragic story. A family had once lived and died within those walls. Their deaths were shrouded in mystery. Could this be the source of the haunting? Was she being tormented by the spirits of the deceased? Hannah needed to know the truth. The truth was out there, hidden in the darkness of the house's history. Hannah's story makes us think. What happens after we die? Are there spirits among us? Can they reach out from beyond the grave? We don't know the answers. We are left with a sense of unease. The unknown is a powerful thing. It can both fascinate and terrify us. Hannah's story reminds us of that. It makes us question our own beliefs about life and death, and it leaves us wondering if we are truly alone. Have you ever had a ghostly encounter? Have you felt a presence you couldn't explain? Share your stories. Let's explore the unknown together. The truth is out there. We just have to be brave enough to seek it. Please like the video, and subscribe to our channel for more chilling tales.